Welcome to our world of fiery videos, covering topics of everyday importance to print providers. Today we will cover calibration with a fiery digital front end.
So the notion of calibration is to maintain consistent tone reproduction on your device. So if you go back to the days of conventional image setters on film, or if you have plate setters, it's the same notion of saying if I have a 50% dot in the source file on my cyan channel, I need to get a 50% dot on the plate, or on the output, or on the film back in that day. Calibration on a digital front end is essential to give you consistency from day to day. And if you go back to those film or have plate setter making plates, you understand that, right? If I don't calibrate on a very regular basis, my color is going to be all over the place. Maybe more importantly on a digital device, the process of calibration will compensate for environmental fluctuations. We'll talk about that more in a minute, but your digital press is probably even a little more sensitive than your conventional press to some environmental variables such as temperature and humidity. Finally, calibration keeps our colors in a known state. So this means that I can easily go back and do reprints of a job that the customer accepted in a week or a day or a month, and they'll be satisfied with that. So what does calibration do? Calibration essentially measures the tonal steps on your output device with no calibration, and then creates a curve to linearize the device or get us in equals out, the dots that we want. So in the example I'm showing you here, you can see that the first three steps of this step wedge are basically all at the same value. There's not enough ink or toner being put down. And at the shadow end, I'm plugged up from 80% on. I'm all at 100% essentially. If I measure this and I create a correction curve, then I can calibrate. The calibrated result is going to look like this. As you see, I've opened up the tone scale in the shadow end, and I've given myself evenly stepped tonal values in each step of the step wedge, including in that highlight end. If you look at the bottom of this slide, you can see what I was trying to achieve, which is that each step in the tone scale is equal. Okay, so we're in a linear state now, which means that we're going to be very repeatable, and also we're going to put ourselves into a good place for the next step of making an ICC profile. So to summarize, calibration establishes even gradation. Showed you some examples of the 10% and 75% patch. This is an example visually of what an uncalibrated and calibrated result would look like. So there's before and after. You can see that we've really opened things up with our calibration. We haven't necessarily gotten the color right, but we'll talk more about that in a second. So let's talk about the variables that affect calibration. Here are the key things you need to look out for or think about when you ask yourself the question, are we okay to keep printing, or is it time that we should calibrate again? The first thing is media changes. Basically, all the substrates that you put in your press are going to require a different calibration. If you print on 12 or 15 different stocks, you can probably find a way to normalize those down to a plain and a matte and a coated, and etc. like that to sort of share some calibrations. But as you're getting started and trying to really precisely match color from one device to another or one paper stock to another, you should make the assumption that every substrate may require its own calibration. And so that tells me something which we'll talk about in a minute. People ask, very common question, so how often should I calibrate? One good way to gauge that is to say, when you're changing from running one job for the last 3 hours to another one that's going to use a different paper, that's probably a good time to calibrate that paper right before you do a job on it. Second thing we need to think about is press technology and speed. So speed goes more to conventional devices. Offset and flexographic devices, and even gravure to a certain degree, are sensitive to the speed at which you run the press. The tonal characteristics, the dot gain changes. So if we linearize plates for a conventional device, we run them at a certain speed when we did our test to confirm we're calibrated or whatever next step is. If we change the speed later, we might have to recalibrate that plating system. In terms of digital devices, it's really about the press technology and how much the press tries to normalize itself before it starts printing. So if you have a high-end digital toner press, you're probably going to see that it sits around for a minute or two before anything comes out, and it says I'm preparing or uses some other term on the screen. That's where it's trying to get itself straightened out. And so those devices typically need calibrated less frequently than something that might be an entry-level device that as soon as you say print starts putting out color pages for you. Print settings also affect this, so calibration is directly tied, or tonal reproduction is directly tied to the halftone screen you use and the resolution at which you run your device. So this isn't a big gotcha, it's just a warning that if I calibrate for my 12-point coated paper on 1200 dpi with a round 200 dot screen or whatever they call it, that's the way that I need to run my jobs, because that's where the calibration is going to be correct. And as I change screens or resolutions, the tonal characteristics change. Chances are my calibration isn't going to be as effective. The last thing is the environmental variables. Temperature is a contributor to this. Humidity is a huge contributor to this. And you probably know this even if you have conventional presses. You know, if you try to gray balance your conventional press, we find that after about the 3/4 tone, there's really not much point in trying to get the gray balance right, because as humidity changes in the press room, your 3-color trap changes in those 3/4 tones. Digital devices are the same way. They're sensitive to humidity across an even broader part of the tonal scale. So unless I'm in a humidity-controlled environment, which maybe one or two of you have built such a room for your digital device, but if it's just sitting out on the shop floor, as humidity changes, I'm going to need to recalibrate because my tonal characteristics of the digital press are going to vary. And so this is the big question. People say, how often should I calibrate? A couple of ideas for you. The first one is, after the engine is warmed up, you should not calibrate on the first sheet out in the morning when the engine is cold and everything's being turned on in the shop. When we warm up the press, 10 or 20 sheets later, it's going to be different. The second thing is, before a large job, so this is a way that I think to work. If we can batch together our jobs, so I have 10 jobs to print, let's say between now and lunchtime, and 3 of them go on one paper stock and the rest of them go on another paper stock, chances are I'll try to put them together unless there's some customer emergency. I'll run all the jobs on the first sheet after calibrating that sheet, and then I'll calibrate the other sheet and run the rest of the jobs. The other time we need to do this is when we have media changes. So again, as you change the papers, that's the time to do it. So let's finish talking about calibration, just to show you how this works, and then we'll talk about what we did. So we're going to give you a demonstration of calibration, and we are demonstrating this on a Fiery. I'm trying to be as non-denominational as I can today, but this is what we have access to, right? So this is the Fiery interface. I'm going to choose the calibrator. When I calibrate, I've got to tell the system which paper I want to calibrate for. So I pick the paper, and of course I have to load that in the press and tell it which tray and so on that it's going to be pulled from, what instrument I want to measure it with. When I get my patch page back, I'm going to use the spectrophotometer to measure it, so I'm being asked to calibrate the spectrophotometer here. And now we're going to measure each strip. So first we'll measure the cyan strip, which looks like this. I have the Invisible Man scanning for you today. And I won't take you through the rest of that, but we'd repeat first magenta, yellow, and black. Get our complete measurements. And then out here we can apply these settings, which will create a new calibration curve based on the tonal characteristics I just measured, and we can go back to printing. Okay? So what have we achieved by calibration? We have moved ourselves from the state you see here in this circle, which is where our color is clearly all over the place, to a state where our color is consistent, which you see at the top here. So we've gotten it to where our color is now landing where we can expect it. It's not where we want it yet, it's not in the middle of the bullseye, but it is printing in a consistent and more predictable fashion. And that's always the first step. It's the minimum requirement to get good color in your shop is to calibrate your device on a regular basis.
Thank you for watching. For additional resources and e-learning classes on this topic, visit our website. To see all recorded sessions and register for upcoming World of Fiery webinars, please visit efi.com/ WOF webinars.